I'm joined today, as you noted, by 5 members of the 25-member Youth Action Plan Task Force, and they will later be presenting on some of the recommendations that you mentioned in your earlier that are contained in the Youth Action Plan. The materials for this item can be found on page 19 of your packets, and the Youth Action Plan itself begins on page 41 of your packets if you wanted to follow along. The 25 members of the Youth Action Plan Task Force worked together over the past year to develop the 9 recommendations you will hear about today. The task force members met a total of 8 times as a full task force, but also held many additional small group working sessions in order to fully respond to the questions set before them in the ordinance that called for the development of the Youth Action Plan. In developing the Youth Action Plan, the task force members solicited community involvement through community conversations throughout the county, and also by developing and disseminating a youth survey, which was returned by over 1,000 youth from King County. In the interest of time, I won't go into detail about the process that the task force used to organize itself and to gather and analyze large amounts of data. I do, however, want to call your attention to 2 organizing principles that the task force used, both to guide its work and in its development of the recommendations. The first is the establishment of 3 foundational principles, which are found on page 21 of your packets. The first principle is that the well-being of children and families and youth and young adults should not be predicted by their race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, ability, geography, income, or immigration status. The second foundational principle, that youth policy development services and programming should intentionally include diverse youth and youth voices in authentic and meaningful ways. And 3, policy development services and programming should intentionally incorporate voices of the people impacted by the policies and services in authentic and meaningful ways. The second organizing principle was the development of a vision statement. The vision statement can be found on page 22 of your packets, and it is as follows. King County is a place where everyone has equitable opportunities to progress through childhood, safe and healthy, building academic and life skills to be thriving members of their community. With that, I'll turn it over to the task force members who will be speaking about the 9 recommendations in chronological order, with the one exception about recommendation area number 5, Get Smart About Data, which I will be presenting at the end, along with recommendation area number 9, relating to implementation.
So, Rachel, they'll go through the framework and the core principles and...
We actually won't be discussing that today. We're going to focus mostly on the recommendations because they're here. I can discuss those in more detail if you wanted at this point or at another time.
Yes. Well, thank you, first of all, for your willingness to serve and a year's worth of what I would say is very meaningful work. The council has stayed abreast of a lot of your doing with regular updates from Rachel and our consultant. And so we're looking forward to what you have to say and how we can work together to implement these good foundational principles and vision that will hopefully make a difference to all of our kids in King County. So would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes, ma'am. There's a button. Good morning, King County Council members. My name is Shamari Jones. I most recently procured a job and then employed at the Bellevue School District as the active leader of graduation success, but in transition to becoming the equity director and leader of graduation success. I think at the end of the day today.
Congratulations in advance.
Thank you. And have been a long-standing King County resident for 10 years, the entire 10 years that I've lived here in this region. And immediately prior to this job was the Chief Operating Officer at the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle.
Thank you very much, Shomari.
Hi, I'm Rochelle Clayton-Strunk. I'm the Director of Education Programs at Encompass, a small nonprofit housed in North Bend, providing pediatric therapy services and early learning education. Before Encompass, I provided 15 years of service at HopeLink, a nonprofit focused on low-income families.
Good morning, council members, and my name is Mike Heinisch. I'm the Executive Director of Kent Youth and Family Services in Kent. I've been there almost 16 years now. I've been involved in children and family issues, working in human services here in King County for, regrettably to say, more than 30 years now.
I would say we're honored to have your service.
Good morning. My name is Calvin Lyons. I'm the president and CEO of the Boys and Girls Clubs of King County. And before that, I worked with the Talaris Institute for age 0 to 8 and directed Rainier Scholars. So I've been involved in youth development and education for probably the last 20 years. Thank you.
Very much, Calvin.
Good morning, council members. I'm Terry Potmeyer. When I began this work in the Youth Action Plan, I was the president and CEO at Friends of Youth, which is an East Side nonprofit that works with child welfare issues, homeless youth, and youth and family services in Far East King County. I am currently on sabbatical, but continue to be very involved and supportive of all the issues that relate to youth in King County.
I would say you're never on sabbatical, Terry. Okay, who wants to start out then? Shomari?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. My recommendation is around social justice and equity. How fitting, since I am doing equity work within my role at the Bellevue School District and the Bellevue community. This is certainly a topic and a subject matter that is near and dear to my heart as it pertains to how we better serve young people within our county and how we access those young people to ensure that we're hearing their voice in the decisions that we're making that benefit them. The recommendation really does get to the heart of the matter, seeing as how our community, in particular, King County, has such a vast number of growing companies and organizations between Microsoft and Boeing and Starbucks. We're number 2 within our country for growth. And so one of the challenges that we're seeing, and one of the largest inequities, is that a lot of individuals in our South King County region cannot realize the opportunities of access to substantial growth. As a matter of fact, we have denoted that there is about a 10-year disparity in lifespan for those who live in South King County versus those who live in East King County, and some of the things we want to make sure that we're addressing. There's a couple bullet points of information that I was provided to present to you this morning. One of them is just simply that 543,000 individuals between the age of 0 and 24 years of age live within our county. And during the 2011 and 2012 school year, American Indian Alaskan Native students had an on-time graduation rate of 55%, which is very dismal. And in the work that I do, we really dig down into the numbers, not just of what our school districts are doing, but really, where's the disproportionality in the individuals by race as they are graduating or not graduating from our districts. But this 55% of individuals is 25% below the county average. County average for third graders who are reading at proficiency in 2012 was 74%. Being 84% students who reached proficiency that were white, 51% that were African American, 46% that were Pacific Islanders, and 42% that were American Indian or Alaskan Native students. So again, we have to really address some of what the disparities are in comparison to the demographics of students that we're seeing here that are sitting right within our county. Student homelessness rate is 10.2% in Tukwila and 4.9% in Highland, but only 0.7%, excuse me, in Issaquah and 0.2% in Mercer Island. So, the question should be, why is that, and what are we doing as a group and as a county to address these measures and to funnel the right type of funding and the right individuals to make sure that we are getting those young people off the streets.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Should I wait until your
jump in.
presentations are done? You don't mind taking questions?
I like it.
Your data for that statistic was from the one-night count?
This is provided for me, and I can only assume I'll defer. I don't know if Rachel knows.
I don't know the exact location from that. There was actually a lot of data that was provided, gathered from many different sources. I don't believe that this particular statistic came from the one-night count. The American Family Survey of the U.S. Census was a big data driver. There was also data provided by many nonprofits throughout the area. So one of the areas that we'll talk about later is just how much data is out there and how much was provided to the task force members to really go through and try to digest and use that in their recommendations.
Well, I just want to say that youth homelessness is a huge issue and one I think is ripe for some policy development, but I am interested in where the data is coming from. And depending on where you live in King County, homelessness can look different than it would from another part. And so I think it's really important to know how we've distinguished who is homeless and where they are.
Right. You know, we look at that as well in the work that I'm doing, and homelessness can simply be a young person who has a home but is not there. It's in their couch surfing. It definitely serves various purposes, but the information that we did collect throughout the duration of the time that we were on this committee came from multiple sources, as stated by Rochelle. We actually even had an entire data team on our group that went out and collected not just surveys, but information from various resources to ensure that we had the right and the most pertinent data to present to you guys today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So these data points demonstrate that some youth face large opportunity gaps from early in life. And where you live, sometimes the color of your skin, your family income should not determine what or how large of an opportunity gap you will overcome or you will need to overcome to be a thriving member of our community. I was asked to speak a little bit to the process of our youth surveying as well as our community conversations. We did get some anecdotal opportunities to glean stories and to glean other individuals within our communities, situations that they were in as it pertained to the subject matter that we're speaking on today. We hosted a series of community conversations in various communities across our King County region. We tried to choose places that had a high density and high populace. We tried to choose places that were rural. We tried to choose places where we can get individuals to participate who normally would not come out because the transportation was a challenge or it wasn't anywhere near their region or location. So we were very fortunate to have several very successful opportunities to engage with the community and get some of the information that we did get. In addition to that, we were able to get, as earlier stated, over 1,000 youth to reply to our 10-question survey to get us some pertinent information to make sure that we do have the best identification of the individuals that we are trying to best serve within this community. So our task force went out and handed surveys out to individuals who didn't have access to electronic resources. Our task force sent out Facebook postings and sent out other electronic versions so folks could most immediately have the potential to fill out the survey. So it was a wonderful effort by our team. I know I'm running out of time, but just as a takeaway, one size does not fit all. You know, we see this in all the work that we're doing. You know, we absolutely cannot create one stopgap and expect that all individuals will be positively impacted by this stopgap. Sometimes it takes an individual understanding of what a person or a family is going through in order to give them what they need to be more successful. And we must really address disproportionality. You know, it's something that I am very passionate about, ensuring that we know where the gaps are. We know the difference between equality and equity, and ensure that some folks do need more than some other folks do in order to just meet the status quo. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm pleased to brief you on recommendation number 2, which is strengthen and stabilize families and children, youth, and young adults. We all know that children do not grow up in isolation, and they grow up in families of many forms. Strong, stable family environments are a key tool in helping youth reach adulthood healthy and safe. When children have healthy childhood, access to quality education and other opportunities, they are less likely to experience homelessness, incarceration, substance abuse, and other hardships. There are 6 major components of recommendation number 2. The first is that to deal with, to reach our vision of the Youth Action Plan, we need to look at the whole person starting at birth. This includes preconception care, family planning, maternity support services, infant and early childhood mental health and developmental screenings, as well as broad parenting and family support. The second component is that, and we've talked about it a little bit, Shamari mentioned about the homelessness, youth homelessness in the county. The county needs to partner with schools to identify children or youth, and those that are on the verge of homelessness to improve access and availability to shelter and housing. More than 5,000 youth in King County experience homelessness each year. Number 3, children who face trauma or adverse childhood experiences, such as homelessness, child abuse, and domestic violence, need additional support. The county should expand physical and behavioral health services through increased provider skills and competencies, increasing high-quality childhood environments, including trauma screenings, and not only increasing support to victims of domestic violence, but connecting those parents who have experienced domestic violence at the earliest points. Number 4, children have frequent transitions in their lives, not only developmental milestones, but just throughout the day. There are tons of transitions that they experience. And during those transitions are when they're often most vulnerable. The county should support connecting pathways between K through 12 and what comes after, college, vocational, or workforce. Children who are limited English proficient or who are refugees and immigrants need additional supports through these transitions. Additionally, we need to encourage positive school climates to help through those transitions, and after-school and summer program access and availability should not vary throughout the county as it does now. Number 5, the Task Force Youth Survey, which Shamari mentioned, and had over 1,000 respondents, identified a lack of opportunities for youth employment as a top concern. The county should prioritize workforce development and match youth not engaged with work or school with education and employment opportunities. And finally, the county should prioritize services for those most in need. Thank you.
Questions? Okay. Mike.
I'm going to present to you recommendations 3 and 4, but I think it's probably a good moment in time before I present particularly recommendation 3 to remind you once again of the vision, and I'll just use the closing statement of the vision, the closing phrase of the vision: thriving members of their communities. I'll say thriving and contributing members of their community. Recommendation 3 is to stop the school-to-prison pipeline. So think about the ending of the vision statement. Let's stop the school-to-prison pipeline. The data shows that students are expelled, particularly those who are repeatedly disciplined, are more likely to drop out of school than students who are not involved. And that dropout begins well prior to high school for many of these kids. So the ledger's already written for many of these kids who have been disciplined early on. It's the #1 predictor, more so than poverty, on whether a child will drop out of school and walk down a road that includes greater likelihood of unemployment and reliance on social welfare and then eventually imprisonment. Amazingly enough, expulsions are occurring in pre-K programs at alarming rates with pronounced racial disproportionality. So it begins very early on. The U.S. Department of Education cites that children of color, black children, represent 18% of quality preschool employment seats, but they represent 48% of kids who are disciplined, suspended, expelled from preschool. Contrast that with 43% of preschool quality and placement enrollment of white children, with 26% of them receiving the same form of discipline. So the disparity begins very early on, as I said. In order to end this, we have a number of recommendations, within the recommendations. Support preventive practices and programs that reduce the likelihood of contact with the juvenile justice system, including providing training, consultation, and support to child care and infant, toddler, and preschool providers to eliminate the use of expulsion. Begins early on. Ensure all families have access to high-quality, developmentally appropriate early child care and educational environments. The second is convene cross-systems partners, school districts, justice system, families, and youth to collaborate on successfully reducing school expulsions and increasing the availability of uses of alternative discipline policies. We see this happening, but it needs to continue and needs to grow. Develop alternative pathways for school completion for those who have been expelled. Promote fairness in the application of justice policies across racial, ethnic, income, gender, and sexual orientation Gets back to what Shamari said. Assess and eliminate the institutional factors that increase disproportionality. Align law enforcement, juvenile, and criminal justice systems with education and employment pathways for youth through common goals, outcomes, and indicators. Assist with reentry from jail to community for youth and young adults. We continue, reduce the use of and move towards eliminating detention for nonviolent crimes of youth under the age of 18. That's a huge one. You've talked about that before in the context of your Children and Family Justice Center. And we believe, and inserted this one fairly late in the process, that this is a big piece to what stops the school to prison pipeline, those nonviolent status offenders as juveniles. Fund and promote programs that stop the school to prison pipeline, including pro-social activities and programs for youth of all ages, particularly after school, this man here. Improve the capacity of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated parents to engage with their children. You know, we talk about parents being the first teachers, parent being lifelong teachers. When a child doesn't have access to a parent because of incarceration, and that parent comes out of the incarceration system, they could be the greatest teacher of a different way to go for their child. That's recommendation number 3. Recommendation number 4 is bust the silos.
Councilmember
I'm sorry.
McDermott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. More an observation. Mr. Heinisch, you really highlighted the early expulsions in preschool, and I was unaware of that. The Seattle Times, but I was already aware of it in K-12. And in fact, the Seattle Times has an article today, and as a visual learner,
Correct.
it has a really good graphic with that article about the disproportional use of discipline in school districts throughout Western Washington. And to realize how early that takes effect, that it's even in preschool, I think is frankly shocking.
Agreed. Recommendation 4 is to bust the silos, we're better working together. This recommendation speaks to a new way of doing business for the county, not just internally, but in relationships with external partners. And I coincidentally enough, I have a lot of stuff in my office, if you've ever been in my office, and I pull it out every once in a while. And I'm going to refer to the Human Services Policy Framework that you adopted originally in 1999. This is from your recommendations report. You did an annual recommendations report on the Human Services Policy Framework from 2001. As the county goes about carrying out the recommendations of this annual report, it will continue to build on the helpful partnerships that it has established with other human services stakeholders. We will focus on expanding those partnerships to include the departments and divisions of the county other than the Community Services Division. This holistic approach to working with communities is needed in order to promote true building of community from the ground up. King County views itself as a partner, a resource in this effort, and not a primary director. And it continues, the county should maintain its participation in community-based planning tables active in various subregions of the county and work cross-departmentally to see how we can bring to bear our resources. That's from 2001. The recommendation we have is let's finally do it. There are many examples of what's called collective impact across the county. I don't want to get caught up on collective impact because many of us talk about collective impact, and I know collective impact well from South King County's efforts. But I want to just briefly talk about the community's opportunity that have been initiated by the county and some of its partners.
Before you go on to that, Madam
Please,
Chair,
Councilmember Dimba.
just one more thought. And Mike, thank you for the history lesson. I saw Terry Mark nodding back there and smiling. I want to give some credit here to Executive Constantine and the Council for the Health and Human Services transformation work, which has been an important step in carrying out the vision you articulated there from 1999, 2000, and that the recommendations here in the Youth Action Plan take that from within county government, breaking down those silos between the health department, the human service department, and work to take it to the next step and working with our partners, right, to make sure we are seamlessly working together, all rowing in the same direction to challenge these or take on these problems. But the Health and Human Service Transformation Plan has been a very, very important body of work that has been taken on by the government and with significant success, I think. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
I certainly would agree. So the Communities of Opportunity is a exciting new venture that the county has launched with partners, and it really does talk about bringing the various stakeholders together in a community to say, how can we solve our problems in the community as partners in this work together? And the task force encourages the county to extend this model and its principles to multifaceted work with children and families. It's particularly true in-house in King County. All county departments and agencies that touch youth need to share an agenda and a coordinated strategy, and this means identifying the outcomes the county and its stakeholders want to achieve and communicating our status on these outcomes internally and externally with the various partners, with transparency and shared accountability. Externally, the county is one player among many, and although not responsible for some key systems involving children and youth, it's uniquely positioned, there we are again, to utilize its regional role and act as a collaborator and a convener, once again. The county should partner, coordinate, and align its goals with the policies and external entities across the county. I'm going to move on to the actual recommendations within the recommendations because my time is short. The task force sees that King County should bring together all county departments and agencies serving children, youth, and families and young adults and join collectively to identify and agree upon the outcomes, the indicators, and what our ultimate goal is. Collect data, shift to a robust performance members, and develop and implement a holistic and intentional approach to serving children, youth, and their families and young adults that's reflective of the social justice and equity principles of the county. King County should regularly communicate internally among its departments and agencies and externally with the broader community on the status of the county's outcomes for children and youth. Externally, King County should act as a multi-system convener, engaging and collaborating with existing coalitions, coordinating councils, partnerships, governments, school districts that represent the full spectrum of the prenatal to 24-year-old services and interests. King County should partner and coordinate and align its children and youth and family and young adult services goals and policies with these external entities in order to achieve the successful vision of the Youth Action Plan, which is thriving, contributing members of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Calvin.
Good morning, and thank you for your time, and thank you for your service to our community. We greatly appreciate your efforts and how you strap on the Kevlar, put on the helmets and the shin guards, and serve as elected officials. And I know it's a tough job with all the issues, so we thank you again for your time. I'm going to speak about recommendation number 6, invest early, invest often, and invest in outcomes. And I'll just share a quick personal story. I grew up in Gary, Indiana. Yeah, so does Shamari. He's also from Gary. Project kid, single mom, 5 boys. I'm number 4. And I saw the invest early, the impact of investing early. I had pre-K. So the next thing I knew, this project kid was graduating as valedictorian, heading to Purdue and Pepperdine and all the degrees. And then I was launched into youth development. I said, how in the world did I get here? I was building airplanes, having a blast. But someone told me to go and make sure kids graduated from high school. And they proceed into the career. And it was so devastating to find that where in the pipeline were they missing it? So as we talk about investing early, I'm excited to have worked with such a distinguished team to put together a plan that says investing early does make a huge difference. So as I get into some of the meat of the recommendation, I'll speak personally and I'll speak with some of the things that some of the notes we've been provided. We know that externally, the task force encourages the county to work with other leaders, and Mike spoke eloquently to that breaking down of silos and the partnership piece. But we encourage the county to lead efforts to collectively finance improvements to bring those to scale. Internally, the county is siloed, not only in departments, programs, and services, but also in how it dedicates its resources. We know that the county's general fund is shrinking, and the county has relied on other revenue streams in its control to provide funds for human services, mental illness and drug dependency, the sales tax for that, and the Veterans and Human Services Levy, which is a property tax. These revenues are currently fully programmed, but could potentially be changed in the future. So we're asking the county to revisit these allocations and see if they could be repurposed. These funding streams can be repurposed for the youth and family work. We know it'll take effort. It'll take work with the citizens oversight boards, but a coordinated strategy is what's needed, and we're excited to provide support as necessary. And this is key. With any restructuring, it should be noted that the county must also protect existing resources from further reductions. As we talk about investing early, upstream, and doing preventative work, we know that the county wants to help families and children, early in the process because it prevents expensive interventions later. And while there will always be a need for crisis services, we know that's important, the task force asks that you consider shifting the pendulum over time. And again, I say over time. We know we can't do it all with one quick bite. It's going to take a while. We also know that some of those resources will be needed down the line to support the services that are already being administered. I attended the executives and the county's presentation for the Best Stars Living Federal Way, and we're excited to see that support would provide support for expectant mothers and children, and for youth and young adults from 0 to 24. So that's an exciting opportunity. And we're asking that the task force support these new investments in outcomes that reduce disparities for children, youth, and families. While we support these new investments, they must be used to invest in outcomes or results rather than outputs and what is done. So the metrics and the elements that we use to measure our success are going to be critical, and we're asking the county to invest wisely to help reduce disparities in meeting these goals. And the county will need a robust approach to data and a way to track and reward outcomes internally and with its contracted partners. And we're again excited to supply any support. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the final number 7 and 8, accountability in the Youth Bill of Rights. But first, I want to preface my remarks by saying what an honor it's been to serve with this group and to take up this topic for an entire year. Really appreciate the council's paying attention to the youth and young adults of our community. There is such power in paying attention, and I have such high hopes for what this plan can mean to the youth of our community. So thank you so much for your leadership on the issue. Accountability, which is recommendation number 7, that was the last work that the Youth Task Force took up. And there was a reason for that. We had this great plan described. We had the elements laid out. And the final work was, how are we going to ensure that we were actually going to be able to achieve the things that we'd set out to do? The Youth Action Plan requires that we change both now and that we continue to change and respond as things change in our community for youth. The task force accordingly made a set of recommendations around accountability to sustain the changes contemplated in the plan, to leverage existing partnerships and to build new ones, to both share responsibility and to take responsibility for activities and programs, and to ensure that our children and youth's needs are being met in the community. 3 key objectives were identified that first had to be met to position the county to achieve the maximum impact from the policies and investments described. Many of the panelists this morning have already mentioned a lot of these things, and I'm going to just quickly touch on them again. We talked about breaking down silos. So the county's departments and agencies that touch the lives of children, and there are many of them, must work together internally to identify and agree on the top outcomes for the population. Then, secondly, they must collect measurable results towards achieving the outcomes using data and indicators. And finally, it's not just internally, but there's an external need for the counties, departments, and agencies who are working together with lots of external partners to actually take the time to develop, align, and measure outcomes using external coalitions and input from other groups and entities. The task force did learn that there are so many county departments and agencies that are involved with so many community coalitions and groups that impact the lives of children. But that involvement is not necessarily as coordinated as it could be for maximum impact, nor is it consistently reported out to the leaders within the county and the policymakers in ways that can inform our policy and operational decisions for children. So to meet those objectives, the task force has 3 solid recommendations. The first is to establish a position or positions to do this work that's outlined in the Youth Action Plan. The task force recently learned that the executive has hired someone to do that, Sheila Capistani, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, to lead the implementation. It was important for our group to be sure that that person then wasn't seen as the single point of accountability, because this is shared work and we all need to be accountable. But we absolutely felt that there needed to be somebody who could make sure that everybody was at the table and that we were continuing to implement the plan as it has been outlined. So we hope that this position will include the coordination of the internal work at the county, that they will participate in tracking and reporting the efforts with the external entities and coalitions, that they will ensure that we're reviewing and analyzing programs, services, and outcomes, that they will convene a team of internal and external experts to develop improvements to the data tracking and reporting, and that they will develop responses to emergent needs with both internal and external partners. The second recommendation was to create an advisory body to the council and to the executive that is inclusive of a wide array of youth, citizens, stakeholders, and entities to draw upon all of those individuals' diverse experiences and knowledges. That body then would review and recommend improvements to achieve the outcomes. They would help support strong data collection. They would help review and analyze county governments and programs, services, and align those outcomes and services with other initiatives and coalitions. They would help recommend policy and budget and other findings to ensure alignment with external efforts. They would participate with, track, and report on the external efforts to inform the development of an aligned regional response that would lead to improved outcomes for our children. And finally, they would be a forum for discussion and exchange of ideas for emergent needs, promising practices, and continuous improvement. Finally, the task force recommends reconvening the task force group in 1 year to review progress on the recommendations that are outlined in the plan. The task force did note that and hopes that the county will consider being strategic in this work, as that there tends to be over many years, and perhaps Mike could speak to this with his 30 years of involvement, collaboration fatigue. So we are really, really hopeful that this will be the transformative plan that will bring people together to create long-lasting and permanent change for kids. Finally, recommendation number 8 is Youth Bill of Rights. As Rochelle noted as we began the presentation, there are 3 fundamental principles that emerged in our work on the task force, things that we believe should guide us and things that we believe should be embedded in the plan. The first was that a child's race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, ability, geography, income, or immigration status should not be a predictor of their well-being. The second was that we should include the voice of those impacted by the plan in authentic and meaningful ways. And finally, that the youth plan should intentionally, authentically, and meaningfully include youth voice. So the reason I reflect on those 3 principles is because it's that third one that actually was the thing that guided us to the conclusion and recommendation on the Youth Bill of Rights. The third principle helped in our response. The ordinance charged us with considering the creation of a Youth Bill of Rights, which other communities have done across the country. Shamari referenced our youth survey and some of the convenings that we had of youth, and we asked the youth what they would prefer with respect to a Youth Bill of Rights. And while 93% thought a Bill of Rights could be of a benefit, they said not yet. First, the youth wanted meaningful engagement and input into the programs and policies that would impact them. So, listening to our youth and taking their recommendation, we have the following recommendations around the Youth Action Plan with respect to a Youth Bill of Rights. First, we'd like to include youth in that Youth Action Plan Advisory Board that I just spoke about. We'd like to see additional resources be employed to encourage youth engagement and to support leadership for youth in policy decision-making. And then we'd third like to recommend that we intentionally look at best practices in our own community for engaging youth voice. And some good examples of authentic youth engagement programs can be found at the Mockingbird Society and in SOAR's King County Youth Advisory Council. So this was a good example of the committee itself putting our fundamental principles to work, and so that explains our recommendation that we not move forward yet on a Youth Bill of Rights.
Questions or comments for the panel?
There are actually 2 additional recommendation areas
Yes.
that I'd like to speak to if there's time. The first is a recommendation area number 5, get smart about data. The task force's recommendation in this area stems from the experiences of the task force itself in examining the data indicators and preparing for their work. Over the course of the last year, the task force found that there's a great deal of data being collected about the county's youth, but that there are significant gaps in that data. Specifically, the task force found that data was difficult to uncover or did not exist in a way that lent itself to outcome analysis. It was difficult to disaggregate the data. The Youth Action Plan covered prenatal to 24-year-olds, and so especially that 18 to 24-year-old age range is difficult to disaggregate from other adults when there are surveys. The data was spread among many public and private agencies, and so it was difficult to get the data to match, or maybe they were closely aligned but not necessarily counting the same sorts of things. And then also that, as you've heard, that the county government lacks a comprehensive shared set of identified outcomes and outcome measures. And finally, that while many external organizations that provide children and family services may be committed to the idea of data development, they may lack the resources to do so. As a result, the task force recommends that the county government collectively identify shared outcomes and outcome measures and then implement that across county departments and agencies. Identify and replicate examples of government and community data sharing. So King County working with external partners to share data that others in the community may already be gathering. Supporting partner organizations to build the capacity to collect data and build this community of data. And finally, to institutionalize the Youth Developed Youth Survey. As you heard, there was a great response to that. So the recommendation is to continue having that youth survey and finding out what the young people of King County have to say. Turning now to the final recommendation area number 9, regarding evaluation and reporting and implementation. You heard many of the pieces of that in some of the earlier recommendations. First, the task force recommends, as a next phase, implementing the task force and establishing a position with the executive branch to coordinate that work. And as we've heard, Sheila Capistani has been hired to do that. Replicating the successful evaluation, reporting, and implementation structures used for other initiatives. So looking maybe to the MID or to the Veterans and Human Services Levy or to Roadmap and Eastside Pathways, which are our community partners. Thirdly, continued community involvement is key throughout the evaluation and implementation process. And finally, as part of the King County evaluation process, taking steps to ensure that the county's contracting processes enable smaller, geographically, ethnically, and culturally specific organizations to successfully compete to provide those services. I'll conclude with just a final note that we've been joined by an additional, in addition to Councilmember Dombowski, who was a task force member, Adrian Quinn, who is the Director of Community and Human Services, was also a task force member. And I would also like to state that the task force was supported by many individuals, but one individual in particular, Kelly Carroll, who began her work here at the council and continued working with the task force toward supporting them in her current role as strategic advisor for the Department of Community and Human Services, is here today.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Other questions or comments? Councilmember Dombowski.
Thank you very much, and want to thank my colleagues for their tremendous support of this undertaking. And Councilmember Hague, thank you for setting this briefing up today and for having the second one, I think, over at your Bellevue meeting in a couple of weeks. And I want to thank each of the panelists today. It was really an honor and privilege to serve with you on the task force during the last year. And I really view this plan as a tool that we can use on a go-forward basis. There is a lot in here. There is a lot in here, and it's really part of the culture that is being developed here at the county of continuous improvement, part of our lean culture. These are big picture recommendations in places and very detailed recommendations in others. They're all about making sure that we are doing better internally and also doing better externally with our partners in our efforts to serve children and young people. The report itself, I think just to give you a little guideline, it talks about the county's history, it talks about the process. It does a very good job assessing the state of young people in King County, the 500,000 or more young people in King County. Then talks about what we're doing right, and then what some of the barriers are to achieving our objective as laid out in the report, and then jumps into the recommendations, which you've heard about today in detail. So that's a quick guide to how to use it. You don't have to start and read from beginning to end. You can jump in and go to the area that you're most interested in. But this is, I think, really a tremendous document and tool, a living tool that we can use as we go through the work here at the county and with our partners for young people. So I'm looking forward to our second briefing on it. I know we've got to take some time to digest it and think about it. Today was very, very helpful. And I want to add my personal thanks and appreciation to Adrian Quinn and Betsy Jones from the Executive's Office, who've been tremendously helpful in this undertaking, and particularly to Kelly Carroll, who is really the prime author of the document and whose history and expertise really was instrumental in achieving the result we've got here today. So thank you, Madam Chair, for hearing it today and for your interest in the topic.
Thank you, Councilmember Dembowski, and thank you all for a year's worth of really meaningful work and some excellent suggestions, and for your ability to continue to collaborate, Mr. Heinisch. So we will stay in touch. This will not be the last time that the council has discussed the Youth Action Plan or its follow-on, which will be going to a public ballot probably in November, the Best Starts for Kids. So I look forward to a continued conversation about the best opportunities for our young people in King County. And again, thank you for your hard work on this issue.
Thank you.